In the gleaming heart of the stellar empire, Princess Aria stood alone in her private garden, watching the 3 moons rise over the crystal spires of the imperial palace. Another day, another rejected suitor who stormed away from the palace in anger and wounded pride. This one had been the son of the Mercurian Trade League's leader. Like all the others before him, he had arrived with grand ships filled with precious gifts. His chest puffed up with confidence that he would be the one to finally win the famous princess's hand. And like all the others, he had left empty-handed. "Your Highness," called out her trusted advisor, Lady Rose, approaching with careful steps. "That was the 312th suitor you've rejected." Aria didn't turn around, her silver eyes fixed on the dancing lights of ships moving through the evening sky. Was he any different from the others? Rose. He brought rare crystals from the outer rings. No, Aria cut in softly. Was he different as a person? Rose fell silent for a moment. "No, Your Highness." He spoke only of his wealth, his family's power, and how fortunate you would be to join his house. A quiet sigh escaped the princess's lips. At 25 standard years, she was considered the most eligible royal in the known galaxy. Her father's empire spanned 50 star systems, and their family's bloodline traced back to the first days of faster-than-light travel. Every noble house, every wealthy merchant clan, and every rising power wanted to link themselves to the imperial throne through marriage. The problem was, none of them wanted to marry Aria. They wanted to marry the idea of her, the perfect princess, the key to power and influence. In her private chambers later that evening, Aria found her father waiting. Emperor Marcus stood tall and proud, his formal robes catching the light from the crystal chandeliers. His expression was one of careful concern. "My daughter," he began, "the noble house of Mercury is quite upset. They're threatening to raise tariffs on our trade routes." Aria moved to her favorite chair, settling into it with practiced grace. "Let them. We both know they need our hyperspace lanes more than we need their goods." The emperor rubbed his temples. "This isn't just about one rejected suitor anymore. The galaxy is watching. There are whispers that you're too proud, too difficult to please. Some say you're trying to weaken our alliances. And do you believe these whispers, father? I believe you are intelligent enough to understand the game of politics we must play." He sat down across from her. "But I also believe you are lonely." For the first time that evening, Aria's perfect composure cracked slightly. "I watched them all come through those doors, father, each one more polished and practiced than the last. They recite their practiced speeches about destiny and alliance. They show off their wealth like peacocks displaying their feathers. But not one of them has ever asked me what I think, what I dream about, what I want for our people." Emperor Marcus' expression softened. "What do you want, my dear?" "Someone real," she whispered. "Someone who sees me as more than a prize to be won, or a step toward power." "Is that too much to ask in a galaxy of trillion souls?" The emperor stood, walking to the window that overlooked the capital city's endless towers. "No, it's not too much to ask. But time isn't infinite, Aria. The empire needs stability. Your choice will affect billions of lives across dozens of worlds." "I know, father." She joined him at the window. "But I won't settle for less than what you and mother had. I've read the historical records. She wasn't from a powerful family. You chose her because you loved her. Times were different then." But there was a note of understanding in his voice. "The Galactic Council is meeting next month. There will be representatives from all major powers, including the newer worlds. Promise me you'll at least try to be open to meeting potential matches there." Aria nodded, though her heart wasn't in it. "I promise to be open, father, but I won't promise to settle." As her father left the room, Aria remained at the window, watching the endless stream of ships moving through the night sky. Somewhere out there, she thought, there had to be someone different, someone real. She just had to find them. The Grand Galactic Council chambers buzzed with activity as representatives from hundreds of worlds gathered for the annual summit. The massive crystal dome above let in the light from all 3 suns, creating dancing rainbows across the polished marble floors. Princess Aria sat in her designated place beside her father's throne, maintaining her perfect posture despite her growing boredom. She had already endured 4 hours of diplomatic speeches, trade negotiations, and not-so-subtle attempts by various delegates to catch her attention. The Galactic Council chamber, despite its beauty, felt more like a grand stage where everyone performed their carefully rehearsed parts. "And now," announced the council speaker, "we welcome the delegation from Earth, representing humanity's growing presence in our galactic community." Aria's attention shifted slightly. Humans were still relatively new to the galactic scene, having achieved faster-than-light travel just 50 years ago. Unlike many species who had been uplifted by other civilizations, humans had developed their technology independently, which made them something of a curiosity. The human delegation was smaller than most, just 5 representatives instead of the usual dozen or more. They wore simple but elegant blue uniforms, lacking the elaborate decorations and status symbols that other species favored. As they took their seats, Aria noticed they seemed more interested in studying the architecture than playing the usual political games. During the mid-session break, Aria slipped away from her guards, something she had perfected over the years. She needed a moment of peace, away from the constant stares and whispers. Finding a quiet corridor, she closed her eyes and let out a long breath. That's when it happened. The sound of rushing footsteps was her only warning before someone collided with her. Data tablets went flying, scattering across the floor with metallic clinks. Aria stumbled but caught herself against the wall. "Oh God, I'm so sorry," a male voice exclaimed. "I was running late and wasn't watching where. Here, let me help you." Aria looked down to see a human man scrambling to collect the fallen tablets. He hadn't even looked up at her face yet, focused entirely on gathering his scattered belongings. His brown hair was slightly messy, and his uniform jacket was missing a button. "It's quite all right," she said, bending down to help him. Something a princess was never supposed to do. He looked up then, and their eyes met. His were a warm brown, full of genuine concern rather than the careful calculation she was used to seeing. Then his eyes widened as recognition slowly dawned on his face. "You're... oh no." He nearly dropped the tablets again. "You're Princess Aria. I just crashed into Princess Aria. I'm going to be executed, aren't I?" The corner of Aria's mouth twitched. "We haven't executed anyone for bumping into royalty in at least 3 generations." He let out a nervous laugh. "That's reassuring. I'm James. James from Earth, obviously. I'm just an aide to the actual delegates. I was supposed to deliver these reports before the next session, and got lost in this maze of a building." "You're going the wrong way," Aria said, pointing in the opposite direction. "The main chamber is that way." "Of course it is." He sighed, then gave her a smile that seemed to light up his whole face. "Thank you, Your Highness. And again, I'm really sorry about running into you. I promise to pay more attention to where I'm going in the future." As he turned to leave, Aria found herself saying, "The quickest way is through the garden corridor. 3rd door on your left." James blinked, then grinned. "Thank you. You just saved me from another embarrassing late entrance." She watched him hurry off, noticing that he still hadn't quite fixed his messy hair or missing button. For the first time in years, she found herself smiling at a stranger's retreating back. When she returned to the council chamber, she found her eyes drifting to the human section more often than not. James stood quietly behind the delegates, managing their data tablets and taking notes. Once, he caught her looking and gave her a small, slightly embarrassed wave before quickly returning to his work. For the rest of the day's sessions, Aria found herself paying far more attention to a simple human aid than to any of the powerful delegates vying for her notice. Something had changed, though she wasn't quite sure what. 3 days after their collision in the hallway, Princess Aria found herself doing something she'd never done before, deliberately getting lost in her own palace. She had memorized James's schedule from the public council records, knowing he often used the Eastern Archive Wing to organize the human delegation's documents. As she turned the corner into the archive section, she saw him sitting at one of the ancient study tables, surrounded by tablets and traditional paper documents. He was so absorbed in his work that he didn't notice her approach. "The carvings on these walls are quite fascinating, aren't they?" she said, causing him to jump slightly. "Princess." He started to stand, but she waved him back down. Yes, they're amazing. I was just admiring the way they tell the story of your civilization's first faster-than-light journey." Arya sat down across from him, ignoring the shocked looks from other archive visitors. Most people don't notice those details. They're too busy looking at the gold inlays. James smiled, running a hand through his perpetually messy hair. "Well, I've always been more interested in the stories behind things than their surface value. These walls are like a book, if you know how to read them." "Tell me what else you see," she said, genuinely curious. His eyes lit up as he pointed to different sections of the wall. "See how the artistic style changes every few panels? That suggests this was carved over generations, each artist adding their own interpretation. And here, this symbol keeps repeating, but it's slightly different each time. I think it represents how your people's understanding of space travel evolved." For the next hour, they talked about history, architecture, and the similarities between human and imperial artistic traditions. James spoke with passionate enthusiasm, frequently stopping mid-sentence to point out new details he noticed. "I'm sorry," he said suddenly, looking embarrassed. "I've been rambling. You probably know all this already." Arya shook her head. "Actually, you've shown me things I've never noticed, and I've lived here my whole life. It's refreshing to see it through different eyes." Their conversations became a daily occurrence after that. Arya would accidentally find herself in whatever quiet corner of the palace James was working in. Sometimes they talked for hours about history and culture. Other times they just sat in comfortable silence while he worked and she read. On the 5th day, she found him in the garden archives, staring up at the evening sky through the glass ceiling. "The stars look different from here," he said as she approached. "Back on Earth, we have different constellations, different stories about the lights in the sky." "Tell me about them," she said, sitting beside him. As James described Earth's constellations, Arya found herself watching his face more than the stars. He spoke with such warmth and honesty, so different from the careful political speech she was used to. "Your Highness," Lady Rose's voice interrupted them. "The evening banquet begins in 30 minutes. You need to prepare." Reality crashed back in. Arya stood, smoothing her dress. "Thank you for sharing your stories, James." "Thank you for listening," he replied with a gentle smile. "Not many people do." As she walked away, Lady Rose fell into step beside her. "The palace staff is talking, Your Highness. A human aide is. Unusual company for someone of your station. He sees the beauty in old stories carved in walls," Arya said softly. "He gets excited about ancient history and talks about stars like they're old friends. When was the last time anyone in this palace did that?" "It's not about what he sees," Rose warned. "It's about what others see. The noble houses are already sending messages to your father." Arya stopped walking, turning to face her old friend. "For the first time in my life, I found someone who doesn't look at me and see a prize to be won or a political advantage to be gained. He just sees me." Rose's expression softened. "And that, Your Highness, is exactly what makes this so dangerous." But as Arya prepared for another evening of political maneuvering and careful diplomacy, she found herself thinking of honest brown eyes and stories about Earth's stars. The news spread through the palace like wildfire. Princess Arya, who had rejected princes and powerful lords from across the galaxy, was spending her days talking to a human aide. The whispers grew louder with each passing day, echoing through the grand halls and reaching far beyond the palace walls. Emperor Marcus sat in his private study, reading through a stack of angry messages from noble houses across the empire. His expression grew darker with each one he read. When Arya entered the room, he didn't look up immediately. "The House of Stellar Commerce has withdrawn their trade agreement," he said finally. "The Mining Confederation is threatening to do the same. 3 planetary governors have requested formal audiences to discuss their concerns about the future of the Empire." Arya stood tall, her hands clasped behind her back. "All this because I choose to have conversations with someone interesting." "Interesting." Her father's voice was sharp. "You've rejected 300 of the most eligible beings in the galaxy. Now you spend your days with a human aide who has no title, no wealth, no political influence. What do you think that looks like to our allies?" "It looks like I value substance over status," she replied calmly. Before her father could respond, the door opened and Lord Black, the Imperial Security Chief, entered with a grim expression. "Your Majesty, Your Highness, we have a situation. Prince Gold from the Trading Worlds has arrived unannounced. He's demanding an audience." Arya's face tightened. Prince Gold had been her most persistent suitor, refusing to accept her rejection 6 months ago. His family controlled crucial trade routes, making him politically untouchable. In the grand reception hall, Prince Gold stood with an entourage of advisors. His golden robes sparkled with embedded jewels, and his perfect posture spoke of carefully cultivated superiority. "Princess Arya," he said, his voice carrying across the hall, "I come seeking answers. Is it true that you spend your days with a human commoner while continuing to reject the galaxy's most worthy suitors?" The hall fell silent. Arya felt every eye on her as she responded, "I spend my time with whom I choose, Prince Gold. That has not changed since I rejected your suit." His face darkened. "You insult every noble house in the galaxy with this behavior. A human. They barely understand space travel. They have no culture, no refinement, no understanding of their place in the galaxy." "That's not true," a voice called out. James stood at the entrance to the hall, holding his data tablets. "We may be new to galactic society, but we have 5,000 years of recorded history, art, and culture. We developed our technology independently, learned to split the atom, reached our moon, and achieved faster-than-light travel through our own efforts." Prince Gold turned, his eyes cold. "How dare you address me directly? Guards, remove this person." "Stop," Arya commanded as guards moved forward. "He has every right to speak here. This is a diplomatic summit, and he is part of Earth's official delegation." "Not anymore," said a new voice. The head of the Earth delegation stepped forward, looking uncomfortable. "James, I'm sorry, but we've received orders from Earth Command. You're being reassigned effective immediately. Your presence here is causing complications." James stood very still, his face carefully blank. Then he bowed slightly to Arya. "I understand. Thank you for the enlightening conversations, Your Highness. I learned more about galactic history from you than from all our official briefings." As he turned to leave, Prince Gold smiled triumphantly. "Now, Princess, perhaps we can discuss more appropriate relationships." "This audience is over," Arya cut him off, her voice ice cold. She turned and walked away, leaving the prince sputtering in rage. Later that evening, she found a small note slipped under her door. In James's neat handwriting, it read, "The stars may look different from our worlds, but they shine on us all the same. Thank you for showing me the beauty in your history. I'll never forget it." Arya held the note tightly, feeling something in her chest ache. For the first time in her life, she understood why her father had once risked everything to marry for love. And for the first time, she wondered if she was brave enough to do the same. The morning after James's forced departure, Princess Arya sat through another tedious council session when Prince Gold strode into the chamber, his golden robes flowing dramatically behind him. The entire room fell silent as he made his way to the center floor. "I invoke the ancient right of challenge," he announced, his voice echoing off the crystal dome above. "As decreed by the first emperor, any noble who feels dishonored may challenge the source of that dishonor to trial by combat." Emperor Marcus leaned forward on his throne. And who do you challenge? Prince Gold. The human, James. He has undermined the dignity of our noble traditions by presuming to court a princess of the Empire. Prince Gold's smile was cold. Unless, of course, he proves himself a coward and refuses. From her seat, Arya's hands gripped her armrests so tightly her knuckles turned white. The ancient right of challenge was rarely invoked, but it was still binding. To refuse would mean permanent disgrace. The challenged party must be present to accept or decline. Lord Black stated, consulting the ancient laws. As he has been reassigned. I'm here. James's voice cut through the murmuring crowd. He stood in the entrance, still wearing his Earth delegation uniform. I received permission to return when I heard about the challenge. Arya's heart skipped. She hadn't expected to see him again so soon, and certainly not like this. Prince Gold was a trained warrior, while James was a diplomat's aide. Do you accept the challenge? Prince Gold asked, clearly expecting a refusal. James walked to the center of the chamber. Before I answer, I'd like to know exactly how I've dishonored you, Prince Gold. I've never claimed to be courting the princess. We shared conversations about history and culture. Is intellectual discourse now considered an insult in the Empire? A ripple of whispers spread through the chamber. James was using the formal challenge protocols perfectly, forcing his accuser to be specific. Prince Gold's face flushed. You presume too much, human. Your very presence near her is an insult to every noble house in the galaxy. I see, James said calmly. Then yes, I accept your challenge. But as the challenged party, I choose the form of combat, correct? That is the law, Lord Black confirmed. Then I choose the trial of minds, James announced. A test of knowledge, strategy, and problem-solving, conducted in the ancient arena with the traditional neural interfaces. The chamber erupted in surprised murmurs. The trial of minds was the most unpredictable form of challenge. It created a shared mental space where competitors faced challenges that tested not just knowledge, but creativity and adaptability. Prince Gold looked less confident now, but he couldn't back down. I accept these terms. The ancient arena was prepared within hours. Both competitors sat in ceremonial chairs, neural interfaces attached to their temples. The gathered crowd watched massive holographic displays, showing what both competitors experienced in the shared mental space. The trial began with historical analysis, moved through complex mathematical problems, and then presented strategic scenarios. Prince Gold's formal education showed in the early stages, but as the challenges became more abstract, requiring creative solutions, James began to pull ahead. The final challenge appeared. A simulation of a star about to go supernova, with an inhabited planet in its system. They had to find a way to save the population with limited resources. Prince Gold immediately began mobilizing evacuation ships, following standard protocols. James, however, looked at the problem differently. He used the planet's own magnetic field to create a temporary shield, buying enough time to evacuate everyone while using far fewer resources. When the neural interfaces powered down, the score was clear. James had won. The chamber was silent as he stood, slightly unsteady from the mental exertion. Prince Gold sat in his chair, face blank with shock. The challenge is concluded, Lord Black announced formally. The human, James, has proven his worth by ancient law. His honor is intact, and his right to interact with members of the royal family is confirmed. Arya watched James bow respectfully to the chamber, his face showing no triumph or arrogance. He had won not through physical strength or political power, but through intelligence, creativity, and understanding. And in doing so, he had changed everything. The evening after the challenge, Emperor Marcus summoned Arya to the ancient reflection chamber, where generations of royalty had made their most important decisions. The room's walls were lined with mirrors that seemed to stretch into infinity, designed to make one face themselves from every angle. You know why we're here, her father said, his voice echoing slightly in the circular room. Arya stood in the center, her reflection multiplied 1,000 times around her. Because of James. Because of what he represents. The Emperor touched one of the mirrors. Our empire stands at a crossroads. The old powers are threatening to withdraw their support. The trading worlds have already suspended 3 major contracts. Even our oldest allies are questioning our stability. All because I found someone worth talking to. Arya asked, though she knew it was more than that. Her father turned to face her. You have until tomorrow's sunset to make your choice. Either announce your engagement to a suitable noble, or, he paused, his voice growing softer, or give up your claim to the throne. The words hung in the air between them. Arya felt her heart pound against her ribs. You would disinherit me. I would let you choose your own path, he corrected. But the Empire must have a leader who can maintain our alliances. We cannot risk everything our ancestors built for. He stopped himself. For love, Arya finished, like you did with Mother. Her father's face softened. Those were different times. The Empire was stronger then, more unified. We could afford to break with tradition. Now, we walk a delicate line. Guards arrived to escort James in. He looked surprised to see them both there, but bowed respectfully. Your Majesty, Your Highness, he said quietly. James, the Emperor acknowledged. You've caused quite a stir in my empire. That was never my intention, Your Majesty. Yet here we are. The Emperor gestured to the mirrors. Do you know why this chamber exists? It forces us to see ourselves as we truly are, from every angle. No hiding, no pretense. James looked at his reflections. I see myself as I am, someone who dared to reach higher than his station. And in doing so, you've forced my daughter to make an impossible choice. The Emperor's voice was not unkind. Unless you make it for her. Understanding dawned on James's face. He turned to Arya, his expression pained. Your Highness. Arya, I can leave. Return to Earth. You shouldn't have to choose between your birthright and you. She finished softly. He nodded. I'm just one person. Your empire needs you. Your people need you. I won't be the reason you lose everything you were born to be. Arya looked at her reflections, seeing herself from every angle just as her ancestors had done. In each mirror, she saw a different version of her future. The dutiful princess, the powerful empress, the woman who followed her heart. Father, she said finally, you told me once that a good ruler must understand their people, all their people. How can I lead an empire of diverse species and cultures if I'm bound by the prejudices of the past? The Emperor watched her carefully. And you believe this is about more than just your personal happiness. James won the challenge not through strength or wealth, but through innovation and creative thinking. Isn't that exactly what our empire needs? New perspectives, new ways of solving problems. She turned to face her father directly. The old houses want everything to stay the same, but the galaxy is changing. Maybe it's time we change too. James stood quietly, watching the exchange, his face showing a mix of hope and resignation. The Emperor was silent for a long moment, looking at his own reflections. Finally, he spoke. You have until sunset tomorrow to show me that this choice serves the Empire as well as your heart. If you can't, the throne passes to your cousin. He left them alone in the Chamber of Mirrors, their thousands of reflections keeping them company as they faced the biggest decision of their lives. You don't have to do this, James said softly. Not for me. Arya took his hand, watching their joined reflections multiply into infinity. Perhaps I'm not doing it just for you. Perhaps I'm doing it for all of us. They had until sunset to prove that love could make an empire stronger, not weaker. The clock was ticking. The great hall of the Imperial Palace had never been so crowded. Representatives from every corner of the galaxy gathered, their varied forms creating a living tapestry of species and cultures. At the center of it all stood Princess Arya, facing the assembled diplomats, nobles, and leaders. For generations, she began, her voice carrying to every corner of the vast chamber. Our empire has been built on tradition. Today, I stand before you to speak of the future. The crowd murmured as James stood quietly to one side, watching with the Earth delegation. He wore a new uniform, one that combined Earth style with Imperial colors. Many of you have expressed concern about my choice, Arya continued. You worry that choosing a human partner will weaken our empire. But look around this room. Every species here was once new to galactic society. Every culture represented was once considered too different, too foreign, too challenging to the established order. She gestured to the ancient murals on the walls. Our very first emperor united warring systems, not by forcing them to abandon their ways, but by finding strength in their differences. That is our true tradition, not rigid adherence to the past, but the wisdom to adapt and grow. Prince Gold stood up from his seat. Pretty words, Princess, but how does this serve the Empire's interests? Arya smiled. I'm glad you asked. She activated the grand holographic display, showing trade routes and diplomatic connections. In the past week since the challenge, Earth has opened its universities to Imperial students. Their fresh perspective on technology has already led to 3 major breakthroughs in our engineering course. The display shifted, showing new trade agreements. Furthermore, 17 independent systems previously hesitant to join our empire have now opened diplomatic relations. They see us embracing change and progress rather than clinging to outdated prejudices. The Emperor, watching from his throne, leaned forward with interest as Arya continued. But most importantly, she said, her voice softening, this union represents hope. Hope that in our vast empire, worth is measured not by birth or species, but by the content of one's character and the strength of one's heart. James stepped forward then, standing beside her. Earth pledges not just its technological innovations, but its spirit of exploration and advancement. We bring new ways of thinking, new solutions to old problems, and a commitment to building bridges between cultures. The chamber erupted in discussion. Old noble houses whispered furiously among themselves, while newer members of the galactic community nodded in approval. Emperor Marcus stood, raising his hand for silence. My daughter had until sunset to prove her choice would serve the Empire. He looked at the sinking suns through the crystal dome above. She has done so, not just with words, but with actions. The Empire will change, as it must, to grow stronger. He descended from his throne, standing before Arya and James. Let it be known that I bless this union, not just as a father, but as an emperor who believes in our future. The ceremony that followed broke with countless traditions while honoring their spirit. James and Arya exchanged vows in multiple languages. Their rings were forged from metals of both Earth and Imperial worlds. The celebration included foods, music, and customs from dozens of cultures. As the new couple danced under the 3 moons, Arya leaned close to James. Did you ever imagine this when you crashed into me with those data tablets? He laughed softly. I was just hoping to avoid execution. This is slightly better. Slightly? She teased. Well, now I have to help run an empire. The data tablets were simpler. Their laughter carried across the hall, where old enemies found themselves sharing tables, where trade agreements were being signed on dinner napkins, and where the future was being written in a new way. In the years that followed, historians would mark this day as the beginning of the Empire's golden age. They would write about how love between a princess and a human aide led to a renaissance of culture, technology, and cooperation. But for James and Arya, dancing under the stars that looked different from their respective worlds, but shone on them all the same, it was simply the beginning of their story. Above them, the 3 suns set on the old era, and the 3 moons rose to light the way forward. The end.